It's just what makes history and archaeology so endlessly interesting. Despite all of our differences though, there's one story which is shared by absolutely everyone: our evolution. Today I want to discuss what we know, but more importantly, what we don't know about the evolution of you. We're going to take a look at the last common ancestor of us and our closest relatives, Neanderthals and Denisovans. We're going to discuss the evidence for our African evolution before moving on to when we left that region, burst onto the world like a invasive species, and the contradictory evidence that really runs right through the heart of our ideas. It should be well good, it should be well interesting. Big thumbs up. Before I start the video, I do have to give a massive thanks to boneclones.com for providing me with this wide array of hominin skulls that you see before you. I've been using boneclones.com since August 24th, 2019, when I made a video on Paranthropus here. If you've seen any of my videos on human evolution, all the skulls have come from boneclones.com. The reason I buy from them is because these are exact replicas of specific fossils that they found. These aren't just facsimiles, these don't just approximately look like a Neanderthal. This is an exact replica of a Neanderthal skull, an exact replica of a Homo erectus skull. And I really love that attention to detail. That's the attention to detail I try to bring with the information in my videos, and so that's the attention to detail I like in the props that I use for these videos. If you're interested in human evolution, I know you're probably interested in what they sell. I would probably own Paranthropus even if I didn't make these videos, because it was learning about them that really sparked.
The roots of the human race are shrouded in mystery, lost in the depths of prehistoric time. For although every school kid knows that we evolved from the apes, the reality is that almost nothing is known about our earliest beginnings. But in October of the year 2000, here in a remote corner of Kenya, an extraordinary find was made.
It was instantaneous. When we found this, it was really the few seconds that followed. We knew this is going to change things.
This could be the oldest human ancestor ever discovered.
We know very little about this time period, so no matter what it is, it's very exciting.
We may at last have found the animal that set us on our path to humanity.
It's the only way we're going to piece together our ancestry and understand where we came from.
This may be the ape that learned to walk. It is February 2001, and a news conference is called to announce an amazing discovery. British, French, and Kenyan scientists have found what they claim is an ancient human ancestor, an animal that may come from the mysterious point in our evolution when we descended from the trees. If they are right, then the implications are enormous. Nothing like this has ever been seen before.
Deuxième main pourrait être le secret d'une grande première. Achète tes prochains vêtements préférés sans trop dépenser sur Vinted.
For some of you, moving to Japan would be a dream come true, right? But interestingly, I know so many people from overseas that moved to Japan and hated it.
I lived briefly in Japan a while ago. The year I spent in Japan was probably the most unhappy of my life.
So, don't be surprised if it happens to you. Almost everyone who moves to Japan will hate Japan or Japanese culture sooner or later. You might think it's impossible, especially Japan has so many cool things like anime, crazy game shows, and Mr. E's favorite electric baths. Yes, in some public baths in Japan, There are baths that send electric currents into the water. But don't worry, it's totally safe because water doesn't conduct electricity at all. I've known so many people from overseas who moved to Japan and then hate Japan after, living here for months or sometimes years later. They usually come here because they loved video games, Japanese culture, or they just wanted some good old-fashioned Japanese fucking. Check out our new merch if you want some fucking too. But after a while of living here, they become depressed. They hate Japan, and the only thing they want is go back to home.
Snake, are you okay? Dad, I hate Japan. I want to go home.
There are many reasons why it happens. Maybe some of you have heard of cultural iceberg. If you imagine the culture of one country to be an iceberg floating in the ocean, the part of the iceberg you can see is usually the material aspect of the country's culture. So for Japan, this would be video games, Japanese food, cosplay, statues of Colonel Sanders in samurai armor, obvious Japanese stuff. But what you don't see is the rest of the iceberg. And this is where the non-material parts of the culture are. This can be things like ideas on work ethic, views on raising children, how society views discriminated people. It's usually this part of the cultural iceberg that we all will have problems with when we move to a new country. So, because most of you who are watching this video might be interested in living in Japan or moving to Japan in the future, so I thought it would be a great idea to ask Mr. Eats to talk about his own experience and how he's been dealing with it.
Hello everyone, it's Mr. Eats. Now let's say you have this big plan to move to Japan. As you begin to prepare for your move, you start dreaming about all the adventures that you're going to get into. Your happiness level starts to go higher and higher, and then you finally make that trip across the ocean, you get off the plane, and you're standing smack dab in the middle of Tokyo. The sights, the sounds, the smells, the experience is all so overwhelming. Now every single thing that you're doing feels like a grand adventure and your happiness is just going through the roof. Welcome to the honeymoon phase. This is the first of 4 phases of culture shock that you're going to experience. Now for most people, this is the most incredible part about moving to a new country. You're going to love the culture, the language, and the people. Seriously, you could get mugged in a back alley and you'll probably come out of it saying, wow, that was the most polite mugging I've ever had. Now the amount of time that you spend here in the honeymoon phase and the next 3 phases varies from person to person. Now when I moved to Japan, I was placed in this really nice little countryside town where I quickly made friends and became a part of the local community. I fell in love with every aspect of that town and the people around me. Heck, I even loved my job as an English teacher there. I found so much joy and happiness there that by the ripe old age of 28, I was considering my retirement there. But all of that came crashing down after I met Mrs. Eats. What? No, I
Welcome to the living room floor where we will be spending the rest of our night tonight. Now, what I wanted to say was that meeting Mrs. Eats was the best thing that could have ever happened in my life. But it was all of the other circumstances that followed that led me to a really, really dark place in life. The second phase of culture shock, the frustration phase. Now, once you hit the peak of happiness during the honeymoon phase, you'll start to get used to the new world around you. And your happiness will actually begin to decline pretty quickly. The things you found most exciting have now become very, very normal to you. And the things that you didn't mind too much actually become annoying or even frustrating. But the frustration phase goes much, much deeper than that. This is a point where depression, resentment, and anger really can start to set in. And yes, even though I love Japan now, there was a point in time where I really hated it and I wanted to go back home.
Dad.
So as my relationship with Mrs. Eats got deeper and deeper and we got closer and closer, I decided to leave that small town that I love so much to the big city of Osaka. There were a lot of factors that made daily living just incredibly difficult. The first was dealing with an actual Japanese-style commute. Now, in my old town, I lived about a 5-minute bike ride away from school, so I never had to get on a train or a bus. But here in Osaka, I had to get on some of the most crowded trains and subways. Not only that, but my school was 2.5 hours away. So I was up at 5:30 to get to school by 8, and it was a nightmare. After the 2.5-hour journey, I was rewarded not by friendly, smiling faces, but by... Unless I was a cool, young, handsome boy like one of these members from the band Kiss My Foot 2, I wasn't gonna get these kids interested at all. And yes, their name is in fact Kiss My Foot 2. So every day became this nightmare of getting on packed trains, lecturing in front of disinterested students, and me just putting on this face like everything was okay. Job dissatisfaction is one of the biggest reasons why you will hate Japan, and it's one that I've heard from my fellow expats over the years. You'll most likely find yourself working as an English teacher at some point in your life in Japan. And
the all-new Google Pixel 6 can last beyond 24 hours with all-day adaptive battery on the first ever all-Google phone. Google Pixel 6, for all you are.
I wish I could be certain about everything. Like whether I put the lid on properly.
Life is full of uncertainties, but not knowing if you'll be approved for a Capital One credit card shouldn't be one of them. With QuickCheck, get 100% certainty before you apply. Capital One, what's in your wallet?
And while I did love teaching at the school that I was at in my small town, it really wasn't the case for my school in the bigger city of Osaka. And to add insult to injury, there is a glass ceiling when it comes to your actual salary. You'll quickly find that for most teaching jobs here in Japan, you're gonna hit the max of the salary, which is around 20 to 25K annually. And in a lot of cases, this wage will almost never rise. Now, you could earn more money if you started teaching at a university or at a wealthy private school, but you're gonna be doing 2 to 3 times more work for that amount of pay. Now, while you're young and single, 25K isn't actually that bad. But once you start to settle down and you wanna have kids, that 25K is not enough at all. And I haven't even mentioned that it's pretty common for Japanese women to quit their jobs after the child is born. So if you are a man and you are only earning 25K from your teaching job, you're gonna have to pick up a lot of part-time jobs in addition to your full-time job just to make ends meet. And trust me, it is insanely common how many of my expat teacher friends have part-time jobs on the side while they're still teaching full-time jobs. And here's another reason that you're gonna hate living in Japan. The differences in work culture and relationships at the office. Going back to our cultural iceberg, this is the stuff below the water. Things like office politics, relationships with your coworkers, the expectations that they have on you at work, and so many other different factors that are very, very different from what you're used to back home. Japanese societal hierarchy also plays a huge role in the workplace, and it's really important for you to be not only respectful, but be willing to go above and beyond for your superiors at work. And of course, workplace bullying does exist in Japan, so if you ever find yourself being treated unfairly, don't be surprised if you're told to just gaman, do your best through this whole situation. Loneliness and feeling isolated is another really big thing that you're going to hate in Japan. Now, most people move out of that honeymoon phase way quicker than they can actually establish a good, solid friend group. And I'm not just talking about occasional acquaintances that you see from time to time and you don't mind chatting to every now and then. I'm talking about people that you can really trust. Friends that not only share the same interests and culture as you, but friends who you can really open yourself up to. But even if you are able to establish those kinds of friendships, not a lot of them have plans to live there for as long as you may plan to. So it may be entirely possible that your new best friend was already planning to move to Thailand 6 months after you got here. And it just becomes tired to go through the same motions over and over and over, rebuilding a friendship, only to see that person eventually leave. So as the stress piles up and the loneliness sets in, this is when you really start to hit the lows of culture shock. And this is a bad place to be in because you just become so bitter and angry and blaming Japan and the country when in many cases, the country and the culture of Japan have nothing to do with whatever you're angry at. But thankfully, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's called the adjustment phase. If you don't give up,
you will start to adjust to whatever the situation is that you're in. Whether that's being more comfortable on relying on others to help you out, figuring out some solution to something annoying that's happening in your life, or maybe even getting your language skills up to a point where you can comfortably say things that you want to say. You'll eventually start to find some solutions, these little wins to problems in your life that make things a lot easier on yourself. And then eventually you're going to hit the final phase of culture shock, and that is the acceptance phase. You're finally going to be able to stop putting your own expectations onto Japanese society and trying to control things around you, and instead learning how to control yourself into better fitting into how Japanese society works. Of course, there are still going to be things that will bother you from time to time, but you're going to be in a much better mental space to deal with those problems. You're going to become more comfortable with your day-to-day life, and it's not going to feel like every day is a struggle.
So what are some culture shock tips you would give to someone who is planning to move to Japan?
No matter who you are going to go through the phases of culture shock. And when you do eventually go through the frustration phase, always remember that if you can stick through it, you're eventually going to go through the acceptance phase, and then things will become much better after that. Try to learn the language as quickly as you can, because I would say that probably 95-99% of your frustration is going to be because you don't understand and you can't say what you want to say. Try to make friends with the locals. When you have friends that are local Japanese people, it's a lot easier to rely on them. And it's nice to know that these people are going to be here for as long as you plan to stay. Have a stash of your favorite foods in the closet for emergency situations whenever you're really missing home. There's something magical about it. It just makes you feel so much better, and it just relieves just a ton of stress.
Exactly the same thing happened when I was living in New Zealand. It was a long time ago, and then there were no Japanese grocery store. But when I was living there, I missed Japanese snacks so much. So that's why I really wish I could get Bokusu at the time.
Bokusu is today's sponsor, and it's also a subscription box service where you can try so many different snacks from big companies to small, family-owned shops in Japan.
When you start your own Bokusu subscription, you help us make more videos and live stream about Japan. Use the special link and coupon code EATS10 to save 10% up to $47 on your own Bokusu subscription now. You also get this really cool cultural guide that teaches you new Japanese phrases and tells you more about the snacks. Trust me, Bokusu snack selection is really good. That's why I'm so excited to recommend this to you. Usually it's a Japanese citrus. Tastes similar to lemon, and then they put yuzu kosho into. Itadakimasu! It's good! So if you are ready for your Japanese snack adventure, please use our link and coupon code EATS10 to start your own Bokusu subscription. You save 10% up to $47, and you get to munch on some great Japanese snacks.
It's really important to make sure that you're not putting your own expectations on what you believe Japan should have been. Accept the culture for what it is, accept the people for who they are, and I think you'll be in a much better position that when you come out of the frustration phase, you didn't convince yourself that Japan is a bad country and Japanese people are all bad people.
Moving to a completely new country with a different culture from your own country is just already overwhelming, right? If you have something that makes you really feel happy, for example, if you love drawing, bring your favorite drawing kits to Japan, and then whenever you feel frustration or when you feel lonely, you start doing whatever you really enjoy doing it. If you're not happy, make yourself happy first. Then you can challenge, so you can recharge and then try again.
So we talked a lot about the ups and downs of living in Japan, and everybody is going to go through them. But I'm pretty sure I can say that there's one absolutely positive thing that you're gonna find when you're living in Japan, and that is a Japanese convenience store.
Yes, there's just so many amazing things about them that I talked about in this video.
So make sure you watch it and I'll see you in that video.
Thanks for watching, Okini! He stole my phrase.
Or Heartburn's favorite word, spicy or mild?
So, our planet doesn't have many countries that are able to reach an economic growth of almost 8%. Even China, quite recently, was able to increase its GDP by only 6.9%, and it expects to stay at that level in the best case for the next few years. Several decades ago, this country's main city
Physical representations of Roman emperors on coins and in busts gives us an idea of what they looked like. But the real question, of course, is what did those guys smell like? So, today, we're going to take a look at what hygiene was like for an ancient Roman emperor. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. After that, leave a comment and let us know what other hygiene-related topics you would like to hear about. Okay? Time to bathe in some weird history. Through the first half of the 1st century, Roman men commonly wore their hair and facial hair long. But Julius Caesar didn't, and when he came to power, he became a model for shorter hair in general. According to the Roman historian Suetonius, Caesar was somewhat overnice in the care of his person, being not only carefully trimmed and shaved, but even having superfluous hair plucked out. Suetonius also tells us that Caesar was balding, and apparently pretty upset about it, because he knew his political enemies and detractors mocked him for it. So what would Caesar do? The same thing many men still do to hide their bald spots. As Suetonius reports, he used to comb forward his scanty locks from the crown of his head, and of all the honors voted him by the Senate and people, there was none which he received or made use of more gladly than the privilege of wearing a laurel wreath at all times. Yeah, you heard that right. Julius Caesar had a comb-over and liked to wear hats. And since powerful people often double as trendsetters, this look became the norm for emperors. And Greek barbers were brought to Rome to maintain cleanly shaven appearances. In fact, it wasn't until Hadrian, over 70 years later, that another Roman emperor wore a beard. And even he may have only done so to hide skin deformities on his face. Emperor Tiberius was called handsome by Suetonius, though the author also noted that he would break out on a sudden with many pimples. Acne was not without remedy during the 1st century. In fact, medical writer Aulus Cornelius Celsus produced an entire treatise on health, cleanliness, and the treatment of various diseases and afflictions, including skin problems. When it came to removing pimples, Celsus prescribed the application of resin, to which not less than the same amount of split alum and a little honey has been added. Then a mixture of equal quantities of galbanum and soda pounded in vinegar to the consistency of honey should be smeared on the affected area. After several hours, that should be washed off and the area should be anointed lightly with oil. That being said, Celsus didn't really think the whole procedure was worth the trouble. And in his De Medicina, he wrote, "To treat pimples and spots and freckles is almost a waste of time." In many ways, Roman bathing practices were consistent regardless of class. Emperors and common folk alike used a strigil, which is essentially a small sickle, to wipe away sweat and oil. After exercising or bathing, Romans would cover themselves in oil. Then they used a strigil to scrape it off into a gutus, or small pitcher. The process was devoid of soap and was followed by a cold water rinse. Wealthy individuals had slaves scrape them, while the poor had to do it themselves. Excess use of the strigil, however, could have negative consequences. While the rinse after a good strigil scrape was meant to restore moisture, the process was irritating to the skin. Strigils were also quite sharp. Suetonius even speculated that Emperor Augustus's numerous callous places resembling ringworm were caused by constant itching of his body and vigorous use of the strigil. Public bathing in Rome was a communal activity enjoyed by members of the lower classes. Wealthy Romans would often have private baths, but as the Roman Empire expanded, bathhouses were built in small and large settlements alike. Emperor Hadrian was a common presence at public baths, which was welcomed by other patrons. According to contemporary reports, he often bathed in the public baths, even with the meanest crowd. On one occasion, Hadrian was at a public bath when he saw a veteran he used to serve with. The man was rubbing his back and the rest of his body against the wall. Hadrian asked why he was doing that, and the man replied that it was because he did not own a slave. Apparently moved, Hadrian presented the man with some slaves and the cost of their maintenance. This act prompted others to try the same thing, in hopes of receiving the same reward. But that hustle didn't quite work out. Instead, when Hadrian saw a number of old men rubbing themselves against the wall for the purpose of arousing the generosity of the emperor, he ordered them to be called out and then rub one another in turn. Well, it was a good try. Romans did not have soap in the modern sense, but they did find other ways to clean their clothes. And one of those ways was by soaking them in urine. We've talked about this in other weird history videos, but yeah, Romans used human and animal urine to strip clothes of dirt and oil. It's not as crazy or disgusting as it sounds, because urine is, in fact, high in ammonia, which is a cleaning agent. Urine is also fairly easy to get. Traders would gather it from public toilets, and taxes levied on urine generated revenue to pay Roman troops, a plan first instituted by Emperor Vespasian. Vespasian's son, Titus, however, was repelled by this tax. According to Suetonius, Vespasian held a piece of money from the first payment to his son's nose, asking whether its odor was offensive to him. When Titus said no, Vespasian replied, "Yet it comes from urine." Talk about rubbing it in your face. Hadrian was a regular visitor at public baths, but Emperor Gallienus took things to a whole other level. According to reports, he indulged in as many as 6 or 7 baths a day during the summer months, and at least 2 or 3 a day in the winter. Emperors Gordian and Commodus were also said to have bathed often. The latter often took his meals in the bath. And, contrary to what you saw in Ridley Scott's 2000 film Gladiator, he would eventually be slain in the bathroom after being given a glass of wine laced with poison. Or it might have been meat. Reports conflict. Regardless of how the poison was delivered, it wasn't actually the toxic substance that ended Commodus's life. In fact, according to Cassius Dio, Commodus vomited some of the poison, and then got pretty pissed off about the whole thing. His anger wouldn't last long, though. For Dio also tells us Narcissus, a wrestler and Commodus's fitness coach, went in and asphyxiated the emperor in his bath. That doesn't really tell us much about hygiene, but it does tell us maybe think twice about the person you hire as a fitness coach. Just like bathing in the Roman world, using the toilet was communal and lacked privacy. Public toilets had numerous seats lined up next to each other with holes that led to sewer systems. Unless you happened to be one of the wealthy Romans, in which case you probably had a private toilet installed. At his villa near Tivoli, Emperor Hadrian, for example, commissioned several private toilets with marble seats and footrests. Many of the single-seat toilets were arranged in clusters near dining halls and designed for individuals of varying social ranks. Archaeological evidence shows that some of these toilets contained bubbling fountains, which would be used to rinse the sponges that Romans used to cleanse themselves. There is also evidence of foundations and sink-like structures where the sponges would have been kept. Though Hadrian and his fellow nobles may not have realized the health benefits at the time, private baths and toilets offered a more sanitary alternative to the public Roman bathhouses, which were rife with parasites and disease.
At Metrolinx, we're making more possible for more people.
You're right.
Don't believe us? Believe this. More transit means more people connecting with their passions. And dip. It means more grandpas joining more clubs. And more folks meeting giant jellyfish. More connections, more dates and new places. I'll have the soup du jour. Unicorn. Does it mean going...
Larger public bathing facilities in Rome were known as thermae. These were often commissioned by emperors and served as a location for socializing. Thermae featured dressing rooms with holes in the walls for patrons to store their belongings. A tepidarium that contained a pool of warm water, a caldarium that contained a pool of hot water, and a frigidarium, which contained a pool of cold water. Some thermes even had outdoor swimming pools, dry saunas, and a gymnasium. The very first therme, which succeeded the smaller bathhouses that came before it, was commissioned by Augustus and designed by his chief deputy, Agrippa, in 25 BC. After that, Roman emperors began commissioning larger and more elaborate thermae for public bathing purposes. Though they didn't keep a formal court, Roman emperors often dined with friends, nobles, and family members. Behavior and fare at the dinner table depended on the emperor. Suetonius described Augustus, for example,